What's up? Welcome to Journey into Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Today we're going to be talking about the weaponization of the term woke to whitewash history. And I have a couple of guests who will provide their perspective on this situation, talking about it from an educational standpoint. And Brother Andre Hayes, who's a teacher for the Los Angeles School District, and his perspective will be educational public policy and curriculum, which he says is a bastion for the maintenance of white supremacy, which is definitely the education is one of the main tools for the maintenance of white supremacy, as it were. And we also have Brother Astenu Brown, who is an educator at UCLA, and we'll give both of these brothers an opportunity to provide their background and talk about the things that they've done. Brother Astenu also has a book out, which you should be alerted to and interested in. I encourage you to purchase. I think Brother Andre also has a book out as well. What brought this subject to mind is, as we've seen the term woke be co-opted, and this is something that we've talked about in a prior show. We talked about the history of woke. We talked about the fact that the term woke was essentially a term that correlated to being conscious, as we spoke about in the Black community. It was someone who was conscious is someone who knows about our history, our ancient history, beyond the history of slavery. And the term conscious became prevalent back in particularly in the 80s and 90s, with the advent of the Black scholarship and Black publishing and Black bookstores and Black study groups. And that's where I met Brother Astenu. And so woke ended up being a term that was correlated to being conscious, being aware of our history. But we've come to see it evolve or devolve to be much more expansive, to include other groups of people, including I guess what they call diversity initiative, which brings in the inclusion of LGBTQ. And so it's lost the original meaning and has come to where it's become a weapon of white supremacy. And so as we stand right now, there's what they call a war on wokeness, which is quite expansive, but it's really a means to disguise anti-Blackness. So, but it has a far-reaching effects, and so I wanted to bring on our brothers, Brother Andre and Brother Astenu, to get their perspectives on it from a historical basis, and also to discuss how the wide-ranging impact that it has in all areas, including on education. Brother Andre, you want to give a little bit about your background?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I've been, first of all, Hotep brothers and sisters, it's a pleasure to be on the show. I've been in public education since 1997. So that's 26 years. I took a couple of years off. My mom got sick, and then I went back to teaching. I've started Chatsworth High School. I spent the bulk of my career at Crenshaw High School in my home community. And then I, came back to the Valley to teach continuation. And now I'm at a LAUSD, a charter school, MSA 2. So I've seen a wide range of institutions, all basically with the same underlying theme, which we'll discuss on the show. So did you want me to go into my take on the woke issue before we start? Or?
Well, I want to go ahead and also introduce Brother Astenu and also allow him to provide his background. Brother Astenu?
Hey, Hotep.
Like Jenny's no piercing.
Brother Sarah, Brother Jamal, and, the Interlight Radio audience. Brother Andre, nice to meet you. Similarly, I've been in education since 1985. So going on my 39th year in education, which is kind of hard to believe. But I began teaching as a middle and high school math teacher in LA Unified School District, and have been involved in teacher education and professional development for the last 25 years. And like Brother Sarah said, he and I met, kind of as part of my development, while I was in the classroom, is when I started, participating in study groups in the LA area in the late 80s, early 90s, and started really learning about the history that I never learned in school, about our ancient past, and started thinking about how do we start to bring that information to the masses of our people in these public education systems, right? So, I guess I'll stop there.
Okay. So I wanted to get both of your perspectives on the use of the term woke right now and how it's being weaponized. And Brother Astenu, last time we broached this subject, you gave us a brief history of the origin of the term woke. Would you mind giving a brief overview of that?
Well, it's very similar to what you talked about earlier. The term woke meant to be someone who was conscious, right? Who had previously been kind of unaware of their history and their culture, other than, like you said, our immediate past of enslavement. Like most of us were taught, African American history and, great Negroes past and present kind of thing. But when you talk about the origin of civilization, the origin of humanity, the origin of civilization, the peopling of the world, the impact of African civilization on European civilization, and the kind of self-esteem that comes from learning that and coming to understand it and starting to incorporate African cultural values into your life really transforms you, right? From being, I guess, metaphorically asleep to being awake. Now, the way that it is currently being used by, the white supremacy culture in this country is as a backlash. And in this instance, we can talk about how historically, every effort of black self-determination in this country has been met with backlash of a different kind. This is simply another example of that. And specifically in 2020, couple things happened. One, we have the on air, live on TV for everyone to see murder of George Floyd by white supremacist cop, and the worldwide demonstrations that resulted because of that. And one of the things that happened was U.S. corporations, universities, school districts, any kind of entity you can think about, came out with these equity statements, right? Saying that, hey, we believe in, the equality of all people, and, we believe in racial justice, all this kind of stuff. If most of these statements have come down now in the backlash. But then a lot of these corporations also made a commitment to diversity, meaning increasing the numbers of people of color, women, people with disabilities of any kind, right, and other underrepresented groups into their organizations, into their schools, making the environment more welcoming for more diverse people, right? And so, like I say, everywhere you look, commercials on TV, full-page ads in newspapers, right? So you have that. But then at the same point, 2020 was also a census year, right? And 2020 was the first census that the white population had declined. Now, and also you have to, there have been articles over the last, 10, 15 years about the declining white birth rate. And so that also is, to me, that's part of the way that you can rationalize why Trump got elected, why you've seen, the rise of all these neo-Nazi militia groups and hate groups, and this whole idea of a replacement theory, right? It really is totally in line with Dr. Welsing's crest theory, of racial, white supremacy, of this fear of white genetic annihilation really coming true, given the fact that, the census information and their declining birth rate. So what you have, you started to see were these backlashes against these diversity and equity It started in schools. You started to see white folks going to school boards and raising hell and disrupting meetings and doing everything they could to stop these kinds of programs, which has resulted in book bannings, the banning of any books about African history. I was on your show earlier talking about the whole issue with the advanced placement African American studies class and how that got watered down. And this was all in that same time period, right? So again, a lot of this kind of anti-woke laws, anti-woke legislation, all that kind of stuff is a direct backlash to and in reaction to the whole George Floyd racial and social justice movement. So I'll kind of pause there.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Astenu. And that's a good segue, because you talked about how it's manifested itself in the educational system. What are you seeing, Brother Andre, from your perspective in that regard?
Well, first of all, I thought that the brother's analysis was dead on. Excuse me. Let me just say first off that I'm kind of rigid about using any language or terms or narrative that's shaped by the oppressor. So they took a term, being awake, they made it, it's converted into slang. Let's start there. And it basically minimizes the amount of work that goes into becoming conscious. I think that my ancestors, John Jackson, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, Sheikh Anta Diop, I could go on, would turn over in their graves knowing that their life's work has been minimized to an adjective that's not even a real adjective. It's basically broken slang that they put together. So it's thrown around, and by doing that, my opinion as an educator, you minimize the importance of understanding that it means consciousness. It means that I no longer have the wool pulled over my eyes. I was blind, therefore I can see. So when you hear it tossed around like that, it upsets me as an educator, because I spent my entire life trying to elevate my consciousness. I do it every day. So it implies almost like it's something you could just pick up on the street corner. So let's start there. With regards to its connection to education, and I like to quote Dr. Clark, if I may, it must be understood that the narrative of white supremacy has to be controlled in the classroom. That's the mass audience that they have, where they can tell you what they want you to believe as truth. So, and I have the standards here, we can go over them later, but it starts in 7th grade with world history. And so one of Dr. Clark's quotes that I really love, it's on the wall in my classroom. He says, "Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything other than maintain and facilitate European domination of the world." So started with that basis, and then you go to the standards, which basically in 7th grade is a world history course, and the first standard is students analyze the cause and effect of the vast expansion and ultimate disintegration of the Roman Empire. That's the beginning. And when you're in school, that is your first world history lesson. So right there, chronologically, we have a problem, because Rome, first of all, came into being thousands of years after Africa had already rose to its zenith. We have Europeans not even being in existence during this time when the Roman Empire existed. Rome was in the Mediterranean. That's not a European state. I mean, let's get the geography correct. Greece is not a European state. They were living in caves and, as Dr. Clark says, living in houses without windows and hadn't even invented a shoe. So for us to teach white supremacy in this capacity, and I'll say it does two things. One, the rhetoric that the European puts out about, oh, we want to cultivate diversity and we want equity. Well, that's just talk if you don't change the curriculum of what you're teaching, because you're teaching subconsciously European kids that they're superior, that people of color have no history, and you're also teaching children of color inferiority through omission, because you're omitting facts about what our contribution was to the world. So those two things combined continue to create a slave mentality among African Americans, among Latinos, and it continues to facilitate a superiority attitude among Europeans, which I always like to use the term European because I don't like the word white, because it's a color, not a culture, and I like to remind them that they're immigrants. So please forgive me if it goes on a little further. White is an abbreviation, but I like to say that. So I've seen personally in the classroom, when you elevate children's knowledge of themselves, how they then perform at a different level. A different expectation is set. You can't say, I don't like math. Well, your ancestors in Kemet invented math. How are you not going to like math? How are you going to be stuck on algebra? Algebra is not about numbers. Algebra is about problem solving. How about that? And higher level thinking. So when you change the narrative, kids see themselves differently, and then they perform differently. And I think that's a big part of what the brother was saying about their control over what's going on in the classroom, and how they've taken the term and they've sort of demonized the term woke. We can't talk about real history unless we contradict and counter the current narrative. You just cannot talk about it.
That's an excellent point. As you brought that to the forefront, it reminds me of my own experience growing up and having my initial education coming from reading at my home when I was growing up in Chicago. I would read the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which was around my house. And there, I learned that it was black people of African descent who created all the arts and sciences. And so when I began my education in the public school system, I knew that the so-called history that was being taught was not accurate because I had already known something about the contributions of black people to history. So I was already aware that his story had been whitewashed. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for my school counterparts who were being brainwashed into a sense of inferiority by virtue of the fact that as they're studying what they're being told is the history of the world and see no representation of their people, then of course it has an adverse effect on our psyche, or the collective psyche. So fast forwarding to now, as we've talked about the advent of the Black Power movement, and then as going back to the times when Astenu and I met during the explosion of the black scholarship with the black bookstores, black authors, black publishings, black study groups, and so forth, that began an expansion of the black consciousness. It even permeated into the music and the conscious rap. And going forward to today, there's been more and more revelations about the contributions of black people to the history of all over the world. Indeed, information indicating, of course, that black people have been the indigenous people of all lands, including here in North and South America. I was talking privately with Brother Astenu and pointing out the backlash against the movie, the remake of The Little Mermaid, where the mermaid was being portrayed by a black woman. But the backlash was, I guess, misinformed, because if you go into the history of what the first depiction of a mermaid was, you will find that the first ever depiction of a mermaid was that of a black woman, Mami Wata. And so as history is being corrected to become more accurate, we're starting to see this backlash against the revelation of history being done under the auspices of anti-wokeness.
Right. A couple of things have happened recently. Kevin Hart, the comedian, had made some public statements about the African origin of the Egyptian civilization, and that the ancient Egyptians were African. He got banned from performing in Egypt. Jada Pinkett Smith produced a Netflix special about Cleopatra, and I get into debates whether or not Cleopatra is even worth arguing over because she's so late into the picture and after Roman conquest of Kemet, but they lost their mind behind that, right? The idea that she was black, and again, she might have been, a like common, multiracial type, but you can't just dispute, like a Queen T or Hatshepsut, right? Or a Nefertari or Nefertiti, right? But it's the current Arab occupiers of Kemet that are really doing everything they can to try to whitewash the history of Kemet, that are then, using this as an example of, well, that's the example of quote unquote woke history, right? They're trying to make everybody in history black. They want to make a movie about Hannibal, I understand, with Denzel cast in the lead role. And again, people are pushing back on that, trying to say that, again, it's a woke version of history. We're just trying to, cast black people in every role. And I mean, it's interesting because, like, there was that play Hamilton, where the guy who produced it deliberately cast people who were not people of color into the roles, but as people of color, like some of the so-called founding fathers, right? And so I guess people are trying to say that maybe what we're doing when we are realistically, portraying these historical figures as they actually are, maybe we're trying to do something like Hamilton, right? Let's just trying to, fantasize, right, when it's actually the reality.
Absolutely. Your take, Brother Andre?
Well, I think from a educational perspective, I go back to the fact that being an African-American teacher in the school system is a paradox, because you're asked to teach things that consciously are not even remotely true. Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, he never landed on the North American continent. George Washington was the first president. Well, technically, he was the 14th president or person in charge of the United States as it was. So the mythology that goes into teaching contradicts every intellectual bone in your body when you're a teacher, and you're expected to get up and repeat this rhetoric knowingly and fully aware that it's not true. So the consequence of speaking the truth means that your evaluation, for lack of a better term, is usually either graded as subpar, or you barely meet the standards because of your inability to stay with the curriculum, because of your pacing and the things that you're discussing in your classroom. Now, mind you, the kids dig it. The kids love it because it gives them a greater sense of self, and they learn things about themselves that they've been in school for 10 or 11 years and never learned. But the establishment itself maintains order by disciplining educators who dare to even drift into any kind of consciousness. Now, I always tell my students that I went to Catholic high school. I didn't get this in school, in public school. I learned this from my African studies professors in college. Dr. Jones up at the University of Washington. Dr. Karinga came up and was a guest lecturer for a year up there. And then we had Dr. Al Black. So we had a lot of educators that gave us, quality research and information. The sad part is most kids in the community who need this information don't get it, and because many of us don't make it to college, we never get exposed to the truth. We don't have these conversations happen in intellectual circles, but it is consciously suppressed in the secondary education and lower education levels, and they hide behind curriculum and public policy. And this push that they're doing now to limit the discussion, well, discussion's already been limited. What you're basically doing now is making it a crime punishable by losing your job if you discuss these things. See, that's the part they leave out in the media when they say, well, these parents are upset and we're going to ban this. And well, it's already banned in using subterfuge. They ban it through the way they evaluate you. You're already aware that if you deviate, you're not going to be adequately and fairly assessed as an educator. So now it's become criminal, which is a whole nother. Not only are we not going to give you a excellent evaluation, we are now going to threaten your job if you discuss X, Y, and Z in the classroom. And so listening to Europeans talk about, we don't want the Caucasian kids to feel guilty, we don't want them to feel bad about themselves. Well, you know what? It's kind of like what the boys said after slavery is over. They gonna have to get over it. It's been this way for 400 years. We're not gonna come in asking for small things. We're not gonna come in and take whatever crumbs you're gonna give us. We're going to demand and expect that our children are going to be taught something other than your version of the truth. So when you look at what they've done, and you know this, both of you brothers are aware of the Daughters of the Confederacy and that whole push to clean up Southern history after slavery. Mm-hmm. That was a major push funded by wealthy Southerners and aristocrats to clean up the history of the South in this country, and that permeates the educational system. So those people that are making the push in education, they have roots that go back generations. This isn't something new. They've always wanted to control what is taught, what is discussed, and what the narrative is. So you're not trying to create a racial utopia where everybody gets along, because in order for us to get along, you have to respect me as a human being. And you're not going to respect me if you don't know anything about my contribution or my history or my people's contribution to the world. You have no respect for me. I'm an afterthought. I'm an asterisk in history, or a footnote, so to speak. So my push, and I'm working on my doctorate, I'm getting a lot of pushback. When I was in my first year, I took last year off, but I was my first year doing it. You get a lot of institutional pushback when you want to change public policy. They try to discourage you. Well, there's other disciplines you can pursue your dissertation on. Why would you do it on this? Is this realistic? Who are your sources? And then when you name your sources, then they start to question the credibility of your sources. So I want everybody who's listening to this to understand that we consciously send our children to our enemies and expect them to educate them. And it's not going to happen. It has never happened. And to continue to expect it to happen would be just menocidal, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. From my perspective, I mean, for me personally, the majority of the history that I've learned about Africa, about world history for that matter, came after I got out of college. I learned the most about history after I got out. And I was never under any illusion that I was going to learn the truth about anything from college, from the educational system. And the same in terms of me educating my son, going into it, knowing that truth was not being taught. And it was really after he got out of college, I basically had to deprogram him and actually teach him the truth. But, as you pointed out, we can't expect the enemy to teach us anything that is going to lead us towards our liberation.
Mhm.
And the truth of it is that ever since the advent of the um, right coming into some semblance of power and control, and the creating the myth of white supremacy has been using history as a primary weapon to basically change the whole narrative about history and to hide the accomplishments of black people that had occurred long before they became civilized. You briefly mentioned, Brother Andre, about how it's being weaponized now, particularly as it's the intent is to basically I guess, redirect the teachings of history and to uh, write history in such a way, or rewrite history to distort the adverse treatment that black people have been subjected to at the hands of the Europeans. Brother Astenu, would you mind commenting a bit on that and how you're basically seeing a revisionist perspective of history in the wake of the anti-woke movement?
Yeah, so I pulled up the Florida anti-woke. Their law is called the Stop Woke Act. What is that? Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, right? And so one of the things that really kind of hits on what Brother Andre was just talking about. So there's like 8 different, kind of points that they make in this document, but one of them is that it's prohibited to teach that a person by virtue of his race, his or her race, color, national origin, or sex bears responsibility for and should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment because of actions committed in the past by other members of the same race, color, national origin, or sex, right? And so, again, that is then saying that, no one should have to bear responsibility for anything that happens, right? That's an argument against reparations or any kind of way of compensating, which is interesting because the state of Florida paid reparations to the survivors of the incident that happened there, the Rosewood incident, right? Right. It also says under, which one is this? There's one about that they shouldn't be made to feel guilty. No, I can't find it, but these are these laws that are being put in place, and in Florida, if a student can report a teacher if they find out if they say something or teach something that they consider to be woke, right? If it's whether it's a book that they use or something that they may bring up in class, right? Whether it's the historical truth. I mean, the reality is, white people have treated black people very badly. All people of color, non-white people in this country, very badly. I'm sorry if that makes you feel bad, but it's the truth, right? So it's like not teaching the truth to shield white people from any sense of anger or guilt, right? So,
Absolutely.
mm. Oh, here it goes. Here it goes. Hold on, I found it. A person. So it's prohibited to teach that a person, by virtue of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin, bears personal responsibility for or must feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress because of actions in which persons played no part committed in the past by other members of the same race, color, national origin, or sex, right? So again, you're not supposed to do anything. You're not supposed to teach the truth about history if it's going to make somebody, we're supposed to be policing other people's feelings to find out whether or not they feel guilty when they find out the truth, right? That their parents stood in front of the doors of the schools and stopped the black children from coming in, right? Their grandparents did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. I mean, truth, if you're going to teach history, you need to teach the truth. Or else what's the point? And it shouldn't be about what's going to be hurting someone's feelings. The truth is the truth about, what happened in history. And, and if it is that there is any intent to advance the cause of having humanity be as one to overcome racism and prejudice and so forth as they espouse, the only way that that's going to come to pass is to acknowledge the truth of what has happened. For people to take responsibility for what has occurred, because you can't reconcile with anyone unless there's an acknowledgement of the things that the respective people involved have engaged themselves in. And you can't have any reconciliation without an expression of remorse,
Mm-hmm.
apology, and so the truth has to be discussed. And if that is to be a true objective of overcoming the racism and prejudice in the world, that's the only way. So it's really, in my opinion, disingenuous to distort history, and then on the other side say that we want to overcome racism and see humanity as being one. And you can't have it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts, Andrew?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with what you just said, and to piggyback on what brother just read from the Florida law, I'm of the belief that is a smokescreen of an excuse as to reasons to ban those discussions. I'm of the thinking that there's a conscious effort to suppress, because if you enlighten, you are going to change African behavior. You're going to change how we see ourselves. And as long as we perceive ourselves from the standpoint of the masses of people that have a slave mentality, so to speak, excuse me, and what I mean by that is people who think, act, and speak through the lens of their oppressor and how we describe ourselves and how we live our lives. I think that the established order is very concerned, especially with technology, the way information travels now, social media, etc. I think they're very concerned about the content being such that we will begin to see ourselves differently. You can't control a slave unless you control his mind. And the slave mentality that permeates our society is mind control. Mm-hmm. It's literally, because I see it every day. I see children who don't want to read. I see children who quote TikTok as a reference for research and academia. I see kids that spend more time playing games than they do engaging each other. So the mind control tools now are so prevalent that we can't allow any major content or discussion that's political or conscious to seep into that, because if we allow it, you won't be able to control that giant once that giant, what they call a sleeping giant, once the giant awakens. And it's creating a momentum shift. But the problem is this, as I see it. If we become more conscious, you are now going to be playing offense instead of defense. See, we've been playing defense too long. Something happens, oh, George Floyd got killed, let's go march, how about we play some offense? White supremacy don't sleep. So why does it take a nationally televised event? Now we want to be active for a little while, let them have their rallies, let them have their marches. It reminds me actually of something that B.F. Skinner said, the dangerous behavior psychologist said back in the 60s. He said they want freedom, they want equality, give them the illusion of it and still control them. You can give them the illusion of freedom, you give them the illusion of equality, but you're going to still control what they think, what they do, how they behave. So we're operating under this umbrella of, oh, it's people are woke and the George Floyd thing and Black Lives Matter and it's a movement. Well, it's not really a movement if it has no institutional stability. That's a rally. Europeans build institutions. That means the president of UCLA dies. UCLA's policies are still intact because it's an institution. We don't build institutions. We have marches. So I think I'm of the opinion that if they did change the curriculum and if we did see more consciousness, we would then move to change things on an institutional level, which is the way you change society. You don't change society with protests and marching. I mean, who are we kidding? Who are we kidding? And the media covers it, and oh, look, at some Caucasians are out marching with black folks, and it reminds you of the 60s. Well, that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, what is in writing, what is being done institutionally that will survive my death, your death, and every other person of consciousness that has walked this earth? Unless you can change what the institutional narrative is or build your own institutions, we're just spinning our wheels. We're having the same conversations that Dr. Ben and Jacob Carruthers, all them brothers had in the 60s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're having the same conversations because we continue to be playing defense, responding. And then the cold part that you mentioned earlier, we respond, and then they hijack that and then put it under another auspices, the LGBTQ movement, which has nothing to do with us. Absolutely nothing to do with us. And it's kind of the way they hijacked the civil rights movement. You want to be real, they hijacked that by putting our women in the women's movement, making black women think they had the same problems as white women, so-called white women. So this is a repeat performance, the same game plan, and we're going for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same strategy where black organizations end up being infiltrated and co-opted. Black organizations are opened up and started by whites, and they're controlled. And so, documentary, the extent to which number of the so-called civil rights organizations, a number of those have been infiltrated and controlled and ended up being tools of white supremacy. And, to your point that about institutions, as we talked about, the educational system is a tool for the maintenance of the myth of white supremacy. Given that that is a fact of what that purpose of that institution is, that's not going to be changed for the liberation of our people.
That's right.
And so the answer is to create our own institutions, and that was why how I met Brother Astenu is what we were attempting to do back then by creating our own institutions such as the study groups to educate our people. So we live in a time now where I think you mentioned, the advent of the internet, the social media, the availability of information, at a touch of your phone. Indeed, we are on the cusp of the Aquarian age, which is the age of information. So it's becoming impossible to suppress information, and so I think that's part of what ends up affecting what's happening right now, because as more information is coming out, the more truth is coming out, the more desperate the attempts are to suppress the information or turn people away or distract people from it. I think we talked. I was talking to Brother Astenu and Brother Andre off air, who were talking about the revelation of the fact that the indigenous people of North and South America are people who would be considered to be black. There's heavy documentation. I had as a guest on my show, Brother David Imhotep, who wrote an exceptional book, which documented the fact that black people have been in this hemisphere for more than hundreds of thousands of years. And so it was pretty incontrovertible, the support that he had for black people being here. We know as well the level of backlash that Kyrie Irving received for just putting a link to the movie From Hebrews to Negroes, and got heavy backlash from the so-called Jewish community. But that documentary is exceptionally well documented, with etymological, DNA, linguistic documentation, to where it's incontrovertible. And so I think that's what we see facing us as in terms of the opposition to the truth being revealed, and the backlash is using the co-option of the term woke, which has been expanded to include, as you pointed out just now, Brother Andre, a number of different groups, including the LGBTQ community, which people have different feelings about, but it's being used to, one, water down the intent of the conscious community to bring forth the truth of our history, but making it such that it's more than about that. It's including all these other things that distract us from our primary objective of bringing out the truth about our history. And I know, you brothers in the educational realm can't comment much on that perspective, but I just wanted to bring that forth, without because I know you guys can't really comment on it. But but I wanted to put that into the into the record because that's basically what we see here. Um, but I wanted to get your thoughts though on and perspectives on the extent to which you see as more and more information is being revealed about uh, the indigenous contributions of our people throughout the world. To what extent do you guys see that contributing to the backlash?
Well, I think that's definitely a huge factor. Brother Sarah, back in the '90s when we were really having success getting the word out in a number of different venues there were a number of different radio programs that were on the air on black-owned radio stations in LA. We would take over their public affairs programs and raise a lot of these issues or demand that our scholars come on and raise these issues. We had it was at the kind of the beginning of the cable news era, the whole cable industry, and so they were a lot more lenient with giving up that public affairs time, and so a lot of our members of our study groups had programs there where they were bringing the scholars on and taping programs and sending them all around. So there were lots of different venues that we were taking opportunity back then. Well, now with the advent of the internet, everybody's got basically a computer in their hand. That just is making the possibilities endless. And so you've had more recently documentary series like the Hidden Figures and is that the one by Tariq? The one by Tariq Nasheed. I get that mixed up with the movie about the female Hidden Colors, right? The Hidden Colors series, right, where people are able to now create content and access content in multiple different ways. They can bypass, the typical information systems in order to get this information. And we need to, as a conscious community, really take advantage of this current technology. I mean, I've been working with these brothers who work in technology and who are doing some of this AI. And, we're going to be able to create, animation versions of our history where we can talk about all of the Nubian and African dynasties in Kemet, right? We can talk about, Mali, Ghana, and Songhai, where we can digitally create these images to tell the stories that we want to tell, right? So the possibilities are really kind of endless out there. We just need to get, our creative people into the right positions where they can start to create the content. And I mean, I'd give you one example, which is really interesting to me, is how these young Black student children are very much on the side of Palestine, much more so than perhaps in our generation. And it's because of social media, the ability, because for so long, Israel has been able to control the narrative of what information gets out. But with the advent of, cell phones and YouTube and TikTok and all that kind of stuff, people are seeing the real story of what's going on there. And it's really galvanized so many of these young people in opposition to Israel and in support of the Palestinian people, right? So I think we need to really strategize about how we can take advantage of this current technological moment that we're in and really use it to our advantage to create content that's going to teach our children their history, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Andre? I think you're muted, brother.
If I could add to that, that is totally well said. Capturing this opportunity for creating the content that needs to go out. We need to get a couple things, I think,
Andre,
5 years from retirement. So
your connection was kind of going.
what's that? I'm sorry.
Your connection was going. So
Can you hear me now?
you said, try, because I know that
Is it better now?
No, I think the picture kind of hurts with your bandwidth. So go ahead and
Okay, is that better?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you. So at this point in my career, I'm 5 years from being able to retire. So I pretty much just speak my mind, but I will say this. We need to inform the masses. Public education doesn't educate. Let's start there. They will train you, and you need that training in science and mathematics and English. Your oppressor is not going to educate you. He is not going to tell you the truth. He's not going to give you the tools to elevate and overcome your current circumstances. He never has, and he never will. And I think a lot of it goes to the fact that we misconstrue the term education. If we are going to be educated, we will educate ourselves. If we're going to be liberated, we will liberate ourselves. The most dangerous slave is not the physical slave. Physical slave, he knows that he has chains on his body. It's like Dr. Akbar said, chains and images of psychological slavery. The most dangerous slave is the one who's a psychological slave. So going to an institution that's training you under the auspices of that you're being educated does nothing but create psychological slaves. We don't teach kids how to think. We don't teach them their real history. We do not teach critical thinking skills. We teach rote memorization. We teach kids to repeat. I'm going to tell you what I want you to know Monday through Thursday. Friday, I'm going to give you a test. You better be able to repeat back to me what I taught you Monday through Thursday. And if you don't, I'm going to give you a letter grade and that you're not going to like. So the system itself is not designed to inform or educate. It is designed to maintain the status quo. With that said, we can send our kids to those institutions under the idea that they're going to be trained, but they must work to self-educate. Those tools you get in English and reading, use those tools to read more and study about yourself. Because we can't continue the cycle of, well, I want my kids to get a quote-unquote good education when you send your kids to a public school system, and I'm going to say it, that is designed for the majority of kids to fail. LAUSD graduates, every year the annual number is in the 34, 35% of them go to Division I schools out of high school. The rest, half of those go to junior college, and most of the ones that go to JC never finish. So what no one asks, what happens to the kids that just fall off? The ones that either drop out or graduate and all they have is a high school diploma. In a capitalist world, you can't demand anything without credentials. So the evidence of failure is there, and it has become socially acceptable. No, when LAUSD was majority Caucasian kids, no one batted an eye. Now it's 70% Latino, about 25% African American, and no one says anything about the literacy rate, about the graduation rates. Hell, the dropout rates are in the 50 percentile. So I think that there's going to have to be a radical campaign to inform parents what you are risking when you send your kids to public school and what your duty is going to have to be to educate your children. They're not, and Dr. Wright used to say, Brother Bobby Wright, ain't no fool kept us in check for no 400 years. They're not going to educate you to overthrow them or to want to destroy them or better yet, take your true place in history. That's something that you're going to have to do for yourself. But having said that, if we can captivate the minds of the people that are being creative with the technology and put information out to get kids to be thirsty about themselves and about their history, I think that there's hope. It's not hopeless, but we have to control the narrative, and it can no longer be co-opted. We cannot allow them to co-opt, as you said, our movements. Our movements have to be sacred. They have to be African people first. As Garvey said, Africans for Africa, for the world and abroad, period. It can't be, let's mix this group and let us piggy. We can't do that. That can't continue. And I know that's a hard line, and people are going to say, you know, or you're homophobic, or you're, no, I'm not. Their movement is their movement. Don't equate that with what we've gone through. You cannot even equate the two. And I think it's insulting to African people all over the world when you mix that in and try to say that those struggles are the same. They're not. They're just simply not.
Well, they're definitely not. And we're the only group who is being prevented from having any semblance of self-determination. You know, we go
right.
to any metropolitan area, and you'll find a little Taiwan, a little Vietnam, a Chinatown, Japantown, Koreatown, right? But no Africa town.
Mm-mm.
So the same, there's a comment?
On what specifically?
Well, I thought you were about to say something.
No, no.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, kind of summarize in terms of, you know, we've talked about, we see that, for one, the educational system is not something that we can rely on in order to be able to bring the truth to our people, and certainly not to be anything that we can look to for our liberation. And as both of you pointed out, we're in a continuous battle to keep the truth and to overcome the suppression of truth, because it's known that self-determination will increase the more we're able to learn the truth about history and accomplishments of our people. And so it's going to be upon us, you know, as adults and people who have done the research, you know, like both of you brothers who are educators, you know, knowing that we can't use the institutions of white supremacy in order to be able to uplift and educate our people, that we're going to need to take that responsibility upon ourselves and share the information that we've learned and continue to do our own research, because the more and more information is being revealed, you know, to us, and that's part of what's contributing to the backlash, you know, as we've discussed, is that more information about our history is being revealed. I was just reading and you know, further about the fact that even in Arizona, in the Grand Canyon, there are caves where artifacts that look as if they are ancient Egyptian artifacts in caves in Arizona. There are very ancient artifacts that look to be African in origin all over North and South America, right? So the illusion of white supremacy is crumbling rapidly, which is, I think, contributing greatly to the backlash which is coming under the auspices of anti-wokeness. So, you know, be mindful. everyone continue to seek. Seeking ye shall find is universal law. And as long as you continue to seek, that which you are seeking will be revealed to you. And, you know, we should seek the truth, for it is the knowledge of the truth that will set us free. So continue to seek. I want to thank Brother Astenu and Brother Andre for joining us. Brothers, I know both of you guys are authors. You guys want to let the audience know about your respective publications?
Sure. The name of my book is called Choosing to See, a Framework for Equity in the Math Classroom. My co-author is Dr. Pamela Seda, and it is a framework that teachers can use to make their mathematics classrooms more culturally responsive and relevant to the students that they have.
And
it's available on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon.
Excellent. And that's a powerful book, because as came up during this discussion here on the show about how our children have been turned away from knowledge of mathematics, and not being made aware of the fact that we were the progenitors of those sciences. Right? And so I encourage you to go ahead and get Brother Astenu, also known as Kendall Brown. Look out for his book, and that'll be a great resource to have in your library. Particularly to encourage your children and anyone who wants to teach mathematics to our children. That would be an excellent resource. Brother Andre, your book?
I have a couple books on Amazon. Your Brain is a Muscle Too, which is a student-athlete life skills guide. Also, 6 Months with Mommy, Chronicles from the Battlefronts of Cancer. It's a cancer caregiver book. And my current work, which will be out at the end of the year, is Dad Interrupted, Divorce, Custody, and Fighting to Be a Father. So that you'll look for that by year's end.
Excellent. That might be another topic to address.
Yes.
And I guess since we're all doing our book plugs, Brother Sarah also has a couple of books on Amazon. The Book of Light and what's my book called? Book of Light and Luminous Wisdom, both of which you can also find on Amazon, and those are spiritual guides. All right, so again, I want to thank Brother Andre and Brother Astenu for joining us. I know that and hope that you found this to be insightful, and I want to encourage you to do your own research, to continue to seek to find the truth, because you will certainly find it, and there's more and more to be revealed. So just continue on our path and your journey into self, and we will find and discover the truth of who we are. So with that, thank you for joining us here on Journey to Self. Thank you again, guest Brother Andre and Brother Astenu, and we'll see you next time here on Journey into Self. Hotep.
Hotep.
Hotep.